Hey everybody, how you doing? We're just gonna be watching and reacting to Tim Kaine's recent viral comments on rights coming from the government and not from God. So,
By your opening comments, and I asked to get a copy of them so I could read them and make sure I quoted them correctly. You state, and this is a quote from Secretary Rubio, our rights come from God, our Creator, not from our laws, not from our governments. I find that very, very troubling. I'm a devout person. I was a missionary in Honduras. We've got other devout folks in this room, Christian, Jewish.
so Tim Kaine claims to be Catholic. I should throw that out there. That's clear to clarify that. So Tim claimed is saying he's a devout person. He's saying he's Catholic, but he won't say he's Catholic.
Muslim American. The notion that rights don't come from laws and don't
Christian, Jewish, Muslim American. He has to make sure to point that out. But then he won't say I'm Catholic. He says I'm a devout person. He says he won't say I'm Catholic.
come from the government, but come from the Creator. That's what the Iranian government believes. It's a theocratic regime that bases its rule on Shia law and targets Sunnis, Baha'is, Jews, Christians, and other religious minorities. And they do it because they believe that they understand what natural rights are from their Creator. So the statement that our rights do not come from our laws.
So his argument here seems to be because other people misunderstand natural rights, therefore natural rights do not come from God. Like, I misunderstand math pretty severely. I'm not very good at math anymore. Does that mean math isn't real? Like, you know, I play poker regularly with my friends. Some of my friends have a strategy that they think is correct, that is like the best strategy. Does that mean like there's not an optimal poker strategy? I mean, just like let's just do the reductio ad absurdum, right? This just doesn't hold up.
Or our governments is extremely troubling. I think the motto over the Supreme Court is equal justice under law, the oath that you and I take, pledge to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, not arbitrarily defined natural rights.
Uh, I mean, he's right. He's right. He's right about that one, right? We have uh, in liberalism, in liberal democracy, the divine is the law. And I'm not saying that's correct. I'm just saying that like there's equal justice under the law, not under God, right? The Pledge of Allegiance is liberty and justice for all, right? One nation under God with liberty and justice for all. So it's under God. But in reality, we've got this like this
For
we've got this like problem where you don't you don't swear to uphold natural rights, you don't swear to uphold justice, you swear to uphold the Constitution. So when the Constitution violates your natural rights, like the Civil Rights Amendments do, they violate the natural rights of every white American in this country. Um, and they do, the 14th Amendment and the Equal Voting Rights Act, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. They violate the natural rights of white Americans because they demand, and this is true, you can look this up. This is true. This is what the gerrymandering thing was about recently. They demand that you uphold the Voting Rights Act of 1965 demands that you specially draw districts that are majority minority, that are majority of a minority, so that they have representation. Not so that you draw them so that there's equal people, and you just draw natural looking districts so that there's an equal amount of people in all of them. Because if you do that, in some states, there's no district where there's a majority black. And so that's the Equal Voting Rights Act has been upheld and interpreted by the Supreme Court to say that that is a violation of the rights of blacks. So white Americans in those districts are definitionally being disenfranchised. They don't have their rights.
TV. The world
Let's look at
is
this.
thinking.
Now, you say, why shouldn't we follow, the unanimity of the world, of judges of the world? Why are judges experts on these questions? What did I learn at Harvard Law School that gives me any more insight into whether there ought to be a right to assisted suicide, or whether there ought to be a right to homosexual sodomy, or whether there ought to be a right to abortion? Any more insight than Joe Sixpack? Why do we think we give these questions to judges? It absolutely befuddles me. Judges have no special qualification for this. They get it only because they're operating under very vague, generalized treaties that I guess they could say they're forced into it. But they're no experts on that subject. Now, I believe in natural law, but I believe that in democratic political institutions, it's up to the people to decide what they think natural law demands.
Okay, so this is Scalia's one problem, right? And this doesn't follow, but I want to talk about what he said first, and we'll get into why what he just said doesn't follow, right? But he's saying that judges don't, like legal systems, don't know, judges don't know, people don't know, legal systems don't know what natural rights are. What do you learn in legal in learning how to use the law and learning how to write the law and learning how to interpret the law and learning how to argue the law? What do you learn about rights? What makes something a right? When do you learn what is a right? You don't. That's the point he's making. And so he's saying that he thinks that we should vote for it, right? But what this is this is moral relativism, and this is the main problem with democracy, right? This is the biggest problem with democracy is that it is moral relativism en masse. It's not that I get to decide what's right and wrong. It's that like a lot of people get to decide what's right and wrong. It still denies that we ought to follow what is right and wrong absolutely in the eyes of the divine, right? Like there's some overarching natural law. It just says that we don't have to follow it if enough people don't think so. It says that he says he thinks it exists, but if enough people don't think so, we're not obligated to follow it, or we're obligated not to follow it. So it just doesn't follow. And I respect it. I mean, Justice Scalia was one of the greatest to ever do it, you know. Um, but this is just wrong. Let's finish it out. I'll let him finish what he's saying.
So you have political campaigns in which people say women have a natural right to abortion. Fine. Say that in a political campaign and then put it to a vote. Because we all disagree on natural law. Why say whatever a bunch of judges think is the answer? That makes no sense in a democracy. There are no clear judicial answers to these questions. And since there aren't, it seems to me it's the kind of a thing that in a democracy we debate with one another. And we ask the people, what do you think the natural law requires? That is how I think natural law comes into play in the political realm.
Okay. So there's that, right? He says that I disagree with him on the idea that people should be allowed to vote on what the natural law is. I think that this is where you get into the church and the state not being separate entities which never engage with one another, but rather the church and the state, right? The church is the bears the spiritual power, and the state bears the temporal power, and the church is the lay people, and they're bound to follow the things which the church says is of her authority. Okay, this is Christendom, right? This is Louis the Ninth. This is Saint Louis the Ninth, right? This is this stuff, right? So I think he's wrong, but he's Justice Scalia. The point he's making, though, that rebuts what Senator Kaine is saying, which is very important, is that the natural rights don't come from the government. Government doesn't get to decide what your rights are. Okay. Right? They don't come from there. That's not where natural rights come from.
I'm a strong believer in natural rights, but I have a feeling if we were to have a debate about natural rights in the room and put people around the table with different religious traditions, there would be some significant differences in the definitions of those natural rights.
Okay, so this is, and once I'm not going to keep saying it. Once again, I'm going to say it last time, but once again, with all due respect to Justice Scalia, to the late Justice Scalia, he's wrong because of what Tim Kaine is saying here, right? Tim Kaine is making an actually very fair point that if natural rights are up for debate, then they come from the government. They can't come from God. They have to come from the people, and how do they come from the people? They come from the people through the government. The people only get to decide what natural rights are if they vote and they go through the government. So why does it matter fundamentally if it's through the judiciary branch or through the legislative branch or through the executive branch? Like fundamentally, it kind of is the same.
You go on to say, I believe our country and our government is the best in the world, and our strength comes from our enduring values. I believe that. But then you say, and you got to choose what to.
Our strength comes from our enduring values. That's what Secretary Rubio said, right? Like, okay, that's true. But our enduring values are the eternal values, which come from outside the government and outside the people. They come from God, right? That's what makes a country great, is its obedience to God.
Say in your opening testimony, these values aren't an endless list of, quote, rights. You put the quote around that to kind of demean the notion of rights that people create and change and form to meet their own needs or desires. These values aren't identity politics. They're the historic natural rights that we have as individuals pursuing life, liberty, and happiness in the world. Pursuing life, liberty, and happiness. The State Department.
Life, liberty, and happiness, right? Okay. Those are where the natural rights come from. Secretary Rubio is right about this. He's completely right. And they, like, the values aren't rights that are made up. They're the actual eternally existing natural rights, the rights which are given us by nature and by God, by nature and our Creator.
Human Rights Report has just struck out all references to the rights of LGBTQ people in countries and the way countries treat LGBTQ.
So there's this is a really interesting thing, right? Because in the way this phrasing works, right, is it says that the rights of LGBTQ people, right, makes it sound like that LGBTQ people don't have any rights, but there are specific rights which only LGBTQ people have. So there are no, this is true, right? When you create a group which doesn't exist, right? And Jason Everett says this a lot, and a lot of Catholics say this, and they're completely right. You know, I've heard Frad say it, I've heard, Wagner say it, and I've heard a lot of these people say this, that there are no LGBTQ people, there are human beings, right? So if you create a group which doesn't exist and then give it special rights, those rights don't exist.
People, I mean, do they have a right to liberty?
Okay, but what? No one has a right to liberty. You have a right to freedom to pursue virtue. You do not. Evil has no rights. Error has no rights.
Do they have a right to life? Do they have a right to happiness? Senator Murphy pointed out that the Human Rights Report has taken out information about freedom of association, about
freedom of association. Do you really want to talk about freedom of association? I don't think it's good to not to have a business that's whites only, but that's freedom of association. Okay? I don't think it's good to say I don't serve people of color. I don't serve colored people here. But that's freedom of association. Do you want to add freedom of association back, Senator Kaine? Because that's what freedom of association is. The only freedom of association is people who agree with Tim Kaine on politics. I mean, like, yeah. I mean, and if it took that out, they took that out, and it's a good thing that they took that out because the only people who are allowed to have freedom of association are leftists, are liberals, are people who hate you, who hate me, who hate us, right? So it's good that they take that out. But we do deserve to have freedom of association. You have a right to freedom of association. You shouldn't have to, like, I should be allowed to have a business that only serves Catholics. I mean, we still have freedom of association to some degree in this country, right? Like the cake baking thing happened several years ago with the gay couple was freedom of association. He didn't want to associate with that. He didn't want his work associated with that thing. But the point I'm making is I don't think Tim Kaine actually wants freedom of association.
About freedom of expression, about exploitation of children, about prison conditions. These were all part of the human rights reports that have been done for years by the State Department. I think these are things that are connected to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They've now all been removed from the State Department's annual human rights report. And the notion that, well, we wanted to make it shorter or more readable just doesn't pass the laugh test with me and many others on this committee. I'm not really going to ask you about your testimony because I believe you offered that in a very sincere way, and I don't want to try to change your opinion on something you sincerely believe. But the notion that our rights do not come from our laws or our government should make people very, very nervous. Because people of any religious tradition or none are entitled to the equal protection of the laws under the 14th Amendment. It shouldn't matter what their religious background is, what they think about God or the Creator, what their...
Okay, here's the thing. Yes, it should. It should matter, right? Catholics should have the freedom of association. Catholics and Christians should have the freedom of association to associate with only Catholics and Christians. Satanists should have no right to deny us. You know, I should have a right to worship a Satanist shouldn't. I'm not sorry. Legged Aggressy says, I just got back. Since when does anyone in U.S. politics actually think freedom of association should be legal? Nobody does. Not since the 60s, as far as I'm aware.
church affiliation is. You are entitled in this country, every person, to the equal protection of the laws. And so to demean laws and demean governments and suggest that rights don't come from laws and governments, I mean, again, I think there are such things as natural rights, and I try to live in accord with them. But I would never demean the law. We are a nation of law, it's not men. Law is not people.
Nations are made of people and men. Governments are made of law. I am loyal to the nation of America. I am not loyal to the United States government. And I don't mean that in the case of like, oh, I'm going to do some espionage, I'm going to do some treason, because that would be a violation of my loyalty to the people of America. But there's no, like, law is not owed loyalty if it is in violation of natural rights, if it's in violation of what's best for the people. We're not to say we're not a nation of men, we're a nation of laws, is to say that like, this is the paperwork Americans thing that we were just talking about with James Lindsay, right? Like, it's to say that, like, the law gets to define reality, not men. Your happiness isn't what's important. The common good is not what's important.
And if we now, after nearly 250 years, suddenly start to demean that or diminish that and suggest, no, it's natural rights as defined by a leader, the leader of Iran or the leader of any nation, that does not create a place of safety or comfort for folks.
So here's what he's saying, right? He's doing a straw man. Also, he's doing I don't know what the logical fallacy name for it is. Somebody in this chat that's smarter than me is going to tell me. But what he's saying is, like, natural rights have to be defined by someone. Therefore, if you believe in natural rights, you believe in somebody's definition. Okay. I believe in the Catholic Church's definition. Loyalty to a government is properly ordained is loyalty to the people from which a government is formed to unify. Simple as. Yep, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Yep. You know, is that the genetic fallacy? It might be the genetic fallacy, honestly. But just because, like, once again, this gets back to just because somebody else has a different definition of a word doesn't mean that the word doesn't exist, right? Like I would disagree with, like, Adrian Vermeule on what Catholic government is. That doesn't mean there's no such thing as Catholic government. right? You understand what I'm saying?
Mr. Wilcox, I want to just now move to you quickly. Very important position. I think it might be the largest group of employees within the State Department in Virginia. We care deeply about it. All the Marine security guards who guard our embassies train at Quantico, the Foreign Affairs Security Training Centers at Fort Barfoot in Southern Virginia that trains our State Department personnel to keep themselves and their families safe. I'm a little bit worried about the effect of the massive rifts in the State Department on the security mission. Can you tell me how you would try to make sure that your division has the resources it needs to get the job done?
Okay. Yeah, we don't care about the security mission. Not in this case. That's a topic for a different time.